Now part of the Darkcast network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a dark side. On the morning of December 16th, 2000, 31-year-old Mike Williams left home before sunrise in North Florida, towing his boat for a duck hunting trip at Lake Seminole. His wife, 30-year-old Denise Williams, expected him back by noon. That day was their 6th wedding anniversary, and they had plans that night in Apalachicola. I hope I said that correctly. Noon came and went, and Mike didn't come home. Denise first called her father to report Mike missing. Then, she called 30-year-old Brian Winchester's wife, Kathy Thomas. Quote, "Around noon, Denise calls me, and she says, 'Do you know where Brian is?' 'Do you know where Mike is?' Later, Brian and his father, Marcus, drove to the places Mike hunted most often at Lake Seminole. By nightfall, they found Mike's 1994 Ford Bronco parked near a remote boat launch in Jackson County on the Florida side of the lake, and it looked abandoned. Welcome, lambs. Welcome to Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide, your true crime podcast where we tell stories of relationships that don't just fall apart. They end in murder. I'm your host, Kai, and today's case begins on what should have been a quiet duck hunting trip in North Florida and turns into a disappearance that haunted a family for nearly 2 decades. Before we get into it, I want to tell you about an upcoming Patreon bonus episode. Over on the Patreon, I'll be covering a case that won't make it to the main feed. The story of an actress who decapitated her husband so she could be with his son. It's one of those cases that sounds impossible until you hear the evidence laid out piece by piece. And that's coming out later this week, patreon.com/Love and Murder. Last week's Kai Rant was about a child who arrived at school injured and no one could reach the parents. That moment triggered a welfare check that exposed what investigators called an uninhabitable home, and why officials say the abuse went far beyond neglect. And when I say an uninhabitable home, I'm being generous. Then I put out a bonus article about the murder of a 12-year-old that took about 30 years and a DNA breakthrough to finally name her killer. You can get all of this and a whole back catalog of bonuses at the $5 a month and above tiers. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. Now that we've gotten that housekeeping out of the way, let's get back to this case of love and murder. The next morning, December 17th, searchers found Mike's boat about 225 feet from the ramp. It was empty and Mike's shotgun was still inside its case. There were decoys, but Mike was nowhere to be found. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission investigators organized a full-scale search. Quote, "We didn't have a whole lot to go on except there was an empty boat and the guy didn't show up." At first, the working theory was that Mike fell overboard, drowned, and his body would surface in 3 to 7 days, like other drownings. But when those days came and went and Mike still didn't surface, people started searching for answers that could explain it. One theory that they had that most people thought was that alligators had taken him. Searchers had reported seeing a lot of gators in the lake. Quote, "Everyone knows the lake is full of alligators. You look for other answers. Why hasn't the body appeared?" There was even a moment where authorities considered whether Mike could have abandoned his family. The search continued for 44 days before being called off in early February 2001. Mike Williams and Denise Merrill met at North Florida Christian School in Tallahassee and were high school sweethearts. Throughout their school years, Mike excelled as student council president, played football, and was voted best personality by his classmates. Denise cheered for the North Florida Eagles and earned the title of Best Dressed. Former classmates described Mike as a very gentle soul who was well respected for his academic achievements and protective nature. After graduating in 1988, both attended Florida State University, where Mike majored in political science and urban planning. The couple married in 1994, beginning their fairy tale life together. As adults, Mike worked as a real estate appraiser, and by the time he was 31, he was making roughly $200,000 a year. In 1999, he and Denise had their daughter, Ansley. From the outside, they looked like a clean-cut couple with a good life and a young family. Brian Winchester and Kathy Aldridge followed almost an identical path. They also went to North Florida Christian School with Mike and Denise, graduating the same year. Brian and Kathy also got married in 1994. As adults, the two couples stayed close. They went out together, traveled together, and spent enough time together that Brian didn't feel like just a friend. Mike saw him as a brother. Now keep that in mind as we continue with this case. The foursome even, quote, talked about sex a lot one time during one of their outings. Both couples eventually had children of approximately the same age, further cementing their bond. Now back to the time of Mike's disappearance. Right after the search was called off, Denise arranged a memorial service for Mike. But Mike's mother, Cheryl, wasn't accepting the idea that her son had drowned and disappeared into the lake. She wasn't accepting the idea that he just left either. A family friend, Patty Ketchum, said, quote, "We knew Mike had not run off. I mean, he loved his family and he adored his daughter. Adored her. Not only that, but this would be the only instance among about 80 known deaths at Lake Seminole where a body was never recovered." So Cheryl did what grieving mothers do when they're not getting answers. She began a relentless campaign for answers, standing on street corners with signs about her missing son, distributing flyers around local roads, and placing newspaper ads seeking information. She kept Mike's face and name in front of anyone who would look, and she kept pushing, even when people wanted her to move on. I don't understand that. I've noticed a couple times just in my life where people have lost children and then other people tell them, you need to move on. How do you ever move on from a child of yours dying? I think people need to get out of their own head, be more patient with people going through situations such as that, and understand that they're not on your timeline. They're on their own timeline. And you really cannot tell somebody, I know how it feels, or I'm sorry, or whatever, unless you've actually lost a child too. So all you need to do is be there for them and not tell them to get over it, essentially. Do you agree with me or don't you agree with me? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think of that. Then in June 2001, 6 months after Mike disappeared, an angler discovered waders floating in the lake. Divers went in and recovered a lightweight hunting jacket with Mike's hunting license in the pocket and a flashlight. Oddly, though, none of them showed appropriate signs of having been underwater for that long. The waders were in good shape, normal and not slimy. They didn't even have damage that made sense for something that had supposedly been underwater for 6 months. The jacket was surprisingly well preserved, and the flashlight still worked when someone switched it on. That didn't feel like 6 months underwater type of evidence. It felt like this showed up when it needed to type of evidence. And to Cheryl, that was all the evidence that she needed to prove that Mike hadn't just disappeared. If Mike had drowned, where was the body? If an alligator took him, where was the evidence of that? And why would Mike, who a friend described as safety conscious, be wearing waders while driving the boat, if that's not how he usually did it in the first place? So, side note, I had to look up waders, and I know there are some lambs like me who don't know what they are. And apparently, there are different kind of waders, like ankle waders, which to me just look like military-type ankle boots. Then there are waders that look like overalls. So you use this to walk into the water, and it prevents the clothes underneath from getting wet. Now, my question is to my lambs who fish. Are you not supposed to wear these while you're in the boat or something? I'm asking because one of the community's questions was, quote, why would he be wearing waders while driving the boat? So is that a dangerous thing to do or something? I'm not sure. I'm not somebody who fishes, so it's a serious question. I really would like to know. So let me know in the comments below, and I'll read your answers in the next episode. Thank you so much. Investigators also uncovered Mike's 3 life insurance policies totaling $1.7 million. Brian had sold Mike a $1 million policy Just 6 months before the disappearance, and Denise even began filing claims just 11 days after Mike went missing, while search efforts were still going on. On claim forms, she characterized the death as, quote, accidental drowning, and requested to, quote, pay proceeds immediately. You seem kind of in a hurry there, Cheryl. Your husband's missing, and instead of out there looking for him, you're trying to dig into the life insurance policy that you just made 6 months ago? Also, they found out that when filing for the Cotton States policy, Denise omitted mentioning the additional $1 million coverage, an omission that would have triggered red flags, according to insurance agent Jack Stansel. So why didn't it trigger the red flags then? In the summer of 2001, at Denise's request, a judge declared Mike legally dead, allowing her to collect the full life insurance. That's what's important to you, huh, Denise? Later, following intense lobbying by Cheryl, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement reopened the case in 2004, and then I guess they closed it because then it said, and then again in 2006. This is what all the reports were saying. So I guess in 2004, maybe in 2005, they closed the case, and then Cheryl was like, nah, and she got it reopened in 2006 again. In 2006, though, she got it opened as a suspicious missing person investigation, but it never actually moved forward until 2016. Cheryl refused to let her son's disappearance be written off as a freak accident. She knew something wasn't right. Law enforcement leaned hard into the idea that Mike had drowned and been eaten by alligators. And that was it. Open and shut case, Johnson. Alligators are at it again. But Cheryl would not accept that, mainly because to her, it made absolutely zero sense. When the investigation stalled, she challenged the science behind the official theory. During her phase of constant pressure, which seemed to be like every day, which I'm not knocking because I'd be doing too, Cheryl and her friend pushed investigators to confront a basic biological fact. Alligators don't feed during the freezing winter months. Then, after Brian and Kathy had divorced in 2003, because yes, they divorced, him and Denise married in December 2005 and lived in the same house that Denise has shared with Mike. How slimy. In the early years of their marriage, Brian stepped into the role as a father figure for Ansley. She was like, you ain't my daddy, I have a daddy. And according to Kathy, Denise was even described as a good stepmother to the son Brian shared with her. From the outside, it looked functional enough. I guess that's really progressive of Kathy, that we were all friends and my husband divorced me for you, and now I'm going to describe her as a good stepmom to my son. Applause. I am not that progressive. I am not that mature, so all I can say is applause because I couldn't do it. In the meantime, the cold case kept being investigated. In 2006, herpetologist Matt Oresco dismantled the alligator consumption theory. Now, pause here. I swear, when I saw it said herpetologist, I didn't think it was someone who was formed to promote interest in reptiles and amphibians. This is according to Google search. But when I saw herpetologist, I'm pretty sure I thought something else. And I was like, what does that have to do with this case? But just reading the context clues, I was like, oh, dealing with reptiles makes sense. Anyway, the herpetologist said, quote, cold weather causes water temperatures to drop, so alligators don't feed in the wintertime. And at the time of Mike's disappearance, the lake temperature measured 58 degrees Fahrenheit, eventually dropping to 46 degrees Fahrenheit. In such conditions, alligators simply maintain body temperature rather than hunting. And even if an alligator had defied all known gator behavior and consumed a 170-pound man, forensic evidence would still be around. As the investigation seemed to be moving too slowly, in 2001, Cheryl's efforts helped bring Mike's disappearance to the investigation discovery series Disappeared. So basically, they were on Disappeared. I don't remember what the name of the episode they were on, but they were on the series Disappeared. Cheryl promoted the episode relentlessly, determined not to let the story fade back into silence. That visibility mattered as it kept the public pressure alive, even as the years dragged on. When that still wasn't enough, on January 1st, 2012, Cheryl began a campaign of writing one letter every day to Governor Rick Scott. She is persistent, and I love it. And she was doing this with the intention of keeping the investigation alive. She eventually wrote over 200 letters asking for a special prosecutor or from the case to be taken away from the FDLE. Because truthfully, by that point, she had lost faith in the agencies handling it and suspected internal conflicts were keeping the truth buried. None of this came without a cost, though. Cheryl faced backlash, criticism, and threats. Some people even defended Denise and Brian. Others accused her of refusing to let go. She kept going anyway because you can't tell me anything. That's my son that's missing. Now, while Sharon is still fighting for her son, Denise and Brian were going through problems of their own. Oh, you don't say. And they ended up separating in 2012. Brian described their relationship as fraught and convoluted. The marriage was marked by constant instability and betrayal, almost from the beginning. So they were cheating on each other, which is, again, not a shocker. One of the biggest fractions came from Brian's admitted sex addiction, which he acknowledged played a major role in the marriage unraveling. I mean, I'm pretty sure it would. How many girls were you with when you were married? Or did you have this sex addiction only for your wife? Nope. He cheated on Denise with a woman named Angela Stafford, and Denise had walked in and caught the two of them in bed together. But the cheating wasn't one-sided. We're sitting here feeling all bad for Denise, but she was also cheating on him with a coworker. At one point, while still married to Denise, Brian even tried to rekindle his relationship with Kathy. Nothing about the marriage was grounded or loyal. It was chaotic and combustible. And after 7 years, the marriage finally cracked. Although they'd separated in 2012, they remained legally married for several more years. Denise eventually filed for divorce in 2015, and Brian fought it. He resisted the split and had to be ordered by a court to cooperate with the divorce proceedings. Damn. But as the case dragged on, his behavior became more erratic. By 2016, as the divorce neared its end, Brian was spiraling. He became convinced that once the marriage was over, Denise would no longer feel bound by their long-standing pact of silence and would finally tell police what really happened to Mike. You heard what I said. That morning, as Denise was leaving her home to drive to work at Florida State University, she was on the phone with her sister when Brian, who had been hiding in her car for hours, popped up from the back seat, and he had a gun. He took the phone and started yelling directions at her. He said he did this because she was blocking his messages and because he felt that he had, quote, nothing to live for if the divorce went through, which it was getting close to be finalized. Denise didn't do what he said. Instead, she pulled up into a CVS parking lot and parked close to the door. She said Brian was acting suicidal and talking like he was going to kill himself because he didn't want the divorce. She managed to talk him down and survived the kidnapping, so yay. Brian eventually apologized and agreed to let Denise drive him back to his truck. But before that happened, Denise noticed what he had brought into her car. There was a tarp, or what some sources said a tan sheet. There was plastic sheeting, a spray bottle of bleach, and some type of tool. So that sounds like a murder kit, a cleanup kit. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about. Brian told her that it was all about killing himself and he wasn't looking to do a murder-suicide or anything, but that kid seems like something different. And he apologized again. Denise told him that she believed him and promised that she wouldn't go to the police. However, she read Kai's book about what to do if someone tells you they're going to murder you and you want to get away. The title is a work in progress. And as soon as he got out of her car, she left and drove straight to the Leon County Sheriff's Office and sang like a bird. Brian was arrested and charged with kidnapping, domestic assault, and armed burglary. At the bond hearing, Denise testified that she was too traumatized to eat or sleep. And with that, the judge ordered Brian held without bond. Just 1 week later, investigators learned that Denise had sent a message to Brian through his father, telling him she, quote, wasn't talking. To law enforcement, it sounded like confirmation of exactly what they feared. The pact of silence between them was still very much alive. I mean, it's not like she's trying to save him. She's trying to save herself, Allegedly, because we're still early in the case. When prosecutors reviewed the items Brian had brought into Denise's car, they didn't see a suicide attempt. They saw preparation, exactly what I said. A gun, plastic sheets, a tarp, bleach, and a tool. The state argued that this wasn't about Brian wanting to die at all, but about a planned murder-suicide, see-through for what it was. Denise surviving wasn't part of that plan. It just came down to luck and her quick thinking. I think it was more her quick thinking than luck. Brian testified that he brought the gun because he was suicidal and didn't want the divorce to go through. I mean, you cannot control what people do. The one thing that you can control is what you do. This is the advice I give my child. You can't control people. Doesn't matter if you've been married 25 years. Doesn't matter if it's your children who you grew and birthed through your own body. You cannot control what other people do. What you can control is what you do. If somebody doesn't want to be with you, does it hurt? Yes, it actually causes physical pain. It sucks. But you know what else hurts? Going to prison. Big Bubba, what they're going to do to you in prison. So you need to choose your hurt wisely. The pain from a breakup is going to last for a little while, and then you move on. And then you might find somebody who actually spends the rest of their life with you. Or you could find Big Bubba, who's going to spend the rest of his life with you too. You know what I'm saying? So choose your pain wisely. Prosecutors didn't buy that explanation. They argued that the plastic and the bleach wasn't for him at all, but it was for cleanup. Their theory was that Brian believed that once the divorce was finalized, Denise would finally talk. And that fear is what pushed him to the act. Which it goes back. First of all, you shouldn't have committed murder. And like I said, you can't control what people do. So you commit murder with somebody else and now you're afraid that they're going to talk. Second of all, what sense is it to be afraid of her talking that you possibly committed murder by committing another murder? How does that make any sense? The state asked for the maximum sentence of 45 years. Instead, Brian was sentenced to 20 years in prison in December 2017, followed by 15 years of probation, and that lighter sentence was the result of a plea deal. Now, I know you heard me talk about plea deals before. In this instance, I believe in a plea deal. I hate when they do a plea deal when they have all the evidence laid out in front of them, and they're like, okay, we'll just do a plea deal. You murdered this baby. All the evidence is there. We have video, we have footage. You told us, somebody else saw it and told us, but we'll give you a plea deal and we'll get you down to 10 years. It's like, what is the point of the plea deal then? But in this instance where they don't have any information about where Mike is, nobody's talking, but if we give you a plea deal, you'll answer our questions. In this instance, I agree with the plea deal. What do y'all think? Let me know in the comments below. 2 months before sentencing, Brian reached an immunity agreement with prosecutors. Immunity. In exchange for full immunity from murder charges, he agreed to confess and lead investigators to Mike's body. I agree. Plea deal. Full immunity, though? Damn, that's a hell of a plea deal. The deal also guaranteed the state would not seek a life sentence for the kidnapping. Yo, he is getting off on this. No life sentence, full immunity. That's a hell of a plea deal. And prosecutors even agreed not to introduce certain evidence at sentencing. Evidence they have actually never publicly detailed, so I don't even know what it is. However, the deal didn't erase Brian's kidnapping conviction, just that they wouldn't seek the life sentence on it, you know what I'm saying? Or introduce certain evidence that they didn't even want to tell us about. He still had to serve the full 20 years and is currently incarcerated at Madison Correctional Institution with a projected release date of 2036. But 20 years? And he's about to let you know what happened to Mike? I don't know if I like this plea deal. So with this plea deal, it unlocked everything. In 2017, Brian gave investigators a detailed minute-by-minute confession of how Mike Williams was killed. He told them about his secret relationship with Denise that started on October 13th, 1997, when she was married. And Mike was thinking that Brian was his brother, basically. Slimy. And it snowballed, he said. He admitted he was living a double life, and in his mind, he had it pretty good. Direct quote, I had a good wife, I had a kid, and I had Denise on the side. This is messed up thinking, but in my mind, I had it pretty good. So he had that big old, nice, moist chocolate cake with chocolate chips in it and fudge dripping down the side. You know how they say he wants his cake and he's eating it too? That's what he had. And on top of that, like he's saying, this is messed up thinking. Yeah, it's messed up thinking. But on top of that, dude, you know what's even more messed up? You slimy bastard. That was your best friend since high school. How could you do that to your best friend? You slimy SOB. I can't get over that. I cannot get over that. Brian was his best friend. Mike felt like this was his brother. And you're like, I had a good wife, I had a kid, and I had Denise on the side. In my mind, it was pretty good. Oh my God. Behind closed doors, they engaged in intimate phone conversations, met whenever Mike traveled for work, slimy, plus occasionally joined each other on trips. However, Kathy, not being an idiot, started to get suspicious. What do they call it? Women's intuition? According to Brian, Denise was miserable in her marriage. Okay, tell her get a freaking divorce. But the next sentence is she didn't want to get a divorce. He said it was about religion, pride, and appearances. Religion? You didn't want to get a divorce because of religion, but you would have an extramarital affair? Appearances? But you would have an extramarital affair. And then I could see the pride, which would lead you to an extramarital affair. So I'm thinking more and more it was just your freaking pride. Quote, Denise, because of the way she was raised, because of her pride, she did not want to get divorced. They also had the custody issue. Brian said Denise didn't want to share custody of Ansley with Mike, which, okay, I see that. That's why she didn't want to get a divorce. Pride and the custody issue, which again, pride. He also said that another reason that she didn't want a divorce was that she wanted to be a, quote, rich widow, not a, quote, poor divorcee. What an asshole. And by late 2000, the pressure was mounting because Mike had started to grow suspicious just like Kathy, because they're not idiots. Over time, the two of them decided Mike had to die. Brian and Denise discussed different scenarios. I mean, you took time to discuss different scenarios, and in not one of those scenarios could you have taken time to figure out how to do this without murdering someone, without being slimy SOBs. Not one of those times. One idea Denise floated around was a double boating accident in the Gulf of Mexico. Mike and Kathy both overboard. She's a cold-hearted bitch. Wow. Brian rejected that plan because he didn't want to kill the mother of his children. He didn't want to kill the mother of his children, but Denise had no problem killing the father of her children. And you were like, yeah, sure, I'll kill the father of your children. But you didn't want to kill the mother of your children, which is a good thought process to have. Don't get me wrong. But why didn't you extend that same thought process to Mike, you know? And why, if you had that moral standing that you didn't want to kill the mother of your children, why would you be with someone who had no qualms about killing the father of her children? To me, that's kind of a red flag and a turnoff, don't you think? They also talked about a staged robbery at Mike's office that would end in murder. But the plan they actually landed on was the one that matched Mike's hobbies, matched the environment, and could be explained away if it went right. A hunting trip, a boating accident, a drowning. With this thought process, there was time and pressure too, because they needed duck hunting season to be on the way, and they needed to act before one of Mike's life insurance policies expired. Brian said that he pictured this as a future with Denise and the money sitting on the side of it. Quote, "We would be together and live happily ever after. And, as a side note, we'd have all this money and enjoy a wonderful life together." The smack I want to give him? So they settled on the idea of the hunting accident because, as Brian explained, they could, quote, "feel better about ourselves if there was at least a chance Mike might survive. We're going to try and kill him, but if he might survive, then we'd be okay with that and we'll feel better about ourselves." What sense does that whole sentence make? How about just not trying to kill him? Then he'll definitely survive. And then you could feel as good about yourself as you want, even though you're having your sex with your best friend's wife. They framed it as leaving the outcome. Oh my, wow, I can't believe they said this. They framed it as leaving the outcome, as they said, quote, "up to God," convincing themselves that if something went wrong, it wouldn't really be murder. Their first attempt was planned for December 9th, 2000, but Mike called it off. He told Brian Denise wouldn't allow him to go. A week later, on December 16th, 2000, Mike ended up going. Brian lured Mike to Lake Seminole under the guise of a duck hunting trip. Quote, "I went and met Mike. I followed him to the lake. We launched a boat. It was just like a hunting trip was supposed to be." He described going out to a remote area known as Stump Field. Once they were out on the water, Brian pushed Mike out of the boat. Wow. Expecting the heavy hunting waders to pull him under. But the plan didn't work. Mike managed to kick off his gear, struggled through the water, and made it to a tree stump. Quote, "He started to yell, and I didn't know how to get out of that situation. He was panicking, and I was panicking. None of this was going like I thought it would go." Mike was fighting to survive, and Brian realized the situation was spiraling out of control. That's when Brian loaded his shotgun, circled the boat around twice, and shot Mike in the face at point blank range. Quote, "When I shot him, it was dark and there was a bright flash. I had to make it happen. I had no choice." You absolutely had a choice, you POS. And didn't you say, if I remember correctly, you settled on the idea of a hunting accident because if he at least had a chance that he might survive, y'all would feel better about yourselves? And literally when he was in the situation that he might survive, you shot him in the face. Okay. Afterwards, Brian dragged Mike's body to shore, loaded him into his truck, and drove roughly an hour away to Carr Lake, where he buried Mike in the mud. Quote, "I drug him to the shoreline and buried him in the mud. When he was done, he went back home and joined the search for his missing friend." Oh my God. If you want to tell me you're a piece of shit without telling me you're a piece of shit. Even as his own father, who genuinely loved Mike, refused to give up hope and continued looking for him. Brian also admitted that he and Denise made a conscious decision to lay low after the murder. They didn't rush to collect the insurance money because they didn't want Denise to look like an eager widow, knowing that any appearance of urgency could draw attention they couldn't afford. For Cheryl, Brian's arrest in 2016 wasn't met with anger. It was met with hope. Cheryl, I feel you. I can't agree with you, but I feel you. It would be met with anger and hope. The anger part would be really hard for me to swallow. Cheryl said that she prayed that he wouldn't kill himself because she wanted him alive, talking, and finally telling the truth. She believed that once Brian was behind bars, he wouldn't let Denise keep both the money and her freedom. For her, justice meant bringing her son home. It meant finally proving the alligator theory was wrong, and it meant stopping Denise from running free after nearly 2 decades. She wanted to make sure that Denise paid for what she had done. Granting Brian immunity was not an easy decision for prosecutors. Assistant State Attorney John Fouche admitted that it was a very, very difficult decision. But without it, Mike would still be a missing person. His body would have never been recovered, and no one would have been looking at Denise. On October 18, 2017, Brian led investigators to Mike's remains. Authorities recovered Mike's remains, quote, buried in 6 feet of muck near Gardner Road in Leon County. To get him out, officials had to do extensive excavation work. They installed water dams and pumps to hold back Carr Lake so they could dig. And the condition of the body was described as, quote, very well preserved for someone who had been missing for 17 years. He was still wearing cold weather gloves and outdoor booties. And he was still wearing his wedding ring. When that body came up, everything now changed because now this wasn't a, quote, suspicious missing person. Now it was a homicide with a recovered victim. When Denise was finally confronted, I was wondering about this. When she was finally confronted with the news of Brian's detailed confession, her reaction was a mixture of feigned ignorance, strategic evasiveness, and a long-term insistence on her total innocence regarding the murder plot. Police used Kathy as an informant to confront Denise with the fact that Brian had confessed. Kathy started with, quote, I've always just pretended like I didn't know anything, and I do know. When Kathy read from a script they told her, she said, quote, Brian told me that y'all planned it. And Denise reacted with apparent shock. Oh, planned what? Oh my God. Literally, that's what she said. That was a quote. Throughout the recorded conversation, Denise never admitted to any involvement in the killing. Instead, she became suspicious and evasive, asking Kathy, quote, what do you know? Rather than providing a standard denial of the murder. Because if somebody said, I know you killed such and such, I'd be like, you know I killed who? I didn't do anything. What are you talking about? Why would you even say that? You know, that would be my response. But she was like, what do you know? Tell me what you know. That's more what she was like. You know what I'm saying? So to me, that's already an admission of guilt. I mean, it's not technically, it wouldn't hold up in court, but why would you answer like that? Rather than providing a standard denial of the murder, she also pointedly asked if Brian's father was involved in making these accusations. Kathy told Denise that she knew about the message she sent to Brian's father and that she, quote, wasn't talking. Denise acknowledged making that comment, but didn't go into any further explanation. She said, yeah, I said that. With all of this information, on May 8th, 2018, on Ansley's 19th birthday, Denise was arrested at her office. Can you imagine how Ansley feels? Not that it's her birthday, but the fact that she just found out that it was her mom who helped to murder her father. I have a feeling she's going to be in a state of denial, like she's going to say, no, my mom's innocent. I can't blame her because that's something hard to wrap your head around, you know what I'm saying? Especially if there's not like hard evidence, like your mother is actually saying she did it, or pictures or CCTV footage or something like that. You know, I don't blame her. Denise was taken into custody just minutes after a grand jury had returned an indictment charging her with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and accessory after the fact. While her attorney, Ethan Way, maintained her innocence, the state moved to have her held without bond. Denise's trial started on December 2018 and lasted just 4 days. Okay. I don't know how to say his name. His name is spelled Fuchs. That's how his name is spelled. I would have pronounced it the F word with an S at the end. I guess the F word plural. I don't know if that's his last name, but for the sake of not cursing as his last name, I'm going to say Foosh. Foosh. Let's go with that, okay? So prosecutor John Foosh told jurors Denise's motives for the murder. He said she had, quote, 2 million reasons for the murder to happen. Mike testified against her, as was part of his plea deal. He gave the same story that he'd given investigators. Prosecutors also presented the recorded call between Kathy and Denise to argue that the, quote, wasn't talking comment wasn't random. It was part of a pact between two people who had kept the secret for 17 years and were still trying to keep it buried. They also introduced a 16-page letter Denise wrote to Brian professing her love. Hold on a second. I just realized he'd been dead for 17 years, and Ansley is only 19. So, yeah, it's going to be really hard for her to think that her mother didn't do it because she was only 2 when her father was killed. She probably barely remembers him. She only had her mother. Wow. I just now thought about that. Anyway, they introduced this letter, 16 pages. Who's going to write a 16-page letter? I mean, Aaliyah only wrote a 4-page letter. I mean, if you know, you know. Anyways, one juror later described the impact of that letter. They said that if you actually read all 16 pages, you end up thinking, quote, are you kidding? You didn't mind whatever he did so that you could all be together? Denise didn't speak at all. She sat through Brian's emotional testimony as he described her as the mastermind behind the plot. He described them as, quote, partners in crime and compared them to, quote, Bonnie and Clyde. This is a game to him. Just a freaking game. This was your best friend, dude. The defense, led by Philip Paravano and Ethan Way, argued that there was no physical evidence linking Denise to the crime. They attacked Brian's credibility, telling the jury they would have to, quote, rely on the word of a murderer and a convicted felon. They maintained that Brian acted alone and was now fabricating Denise's involvement to get a lighter sentence. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Denise guilty on all counts, and in February 2019, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jurors later said that they were initially split, some guilty, some not guilty, but they ultimately believed Brian's testimony even without physical evidence. However, the legal battle wasn't over. In 2020, an appeals court overturned the first-degree murder conviction. The judge focused on one key issue. Denise wasn't at the lake when Mike was shot, and there was no testimony about her doing or saying anything that directly aided or abetted Brian in the actual shooting. They ruled that while there was evidence she conspired to kill Mike, there was no proof that she performed an act. However, her conspiracy conviction remained. Which that sounds plausible. You know, she wasn't actually there. She didn't tell him to shoot Mike. It was supposed to be like a drowning accident, a boated accident, and it was supposed to be, if he made it, he made it. If he didn't, he didn't. That's what they said. And then Brian took it upon himself to shoot Mike in the face. So I can understand that. So in 2021, Denise went back for resentencing. Here, Cheryl told the judge, quote, please don't show her any mercy. She didn't show my son any mercy. She said that justice would only be complete if Denise served every minute of her 30-year sentence. And you should go by what the family, especially the mother of the victim says. Like, that's just how it should be. Like, this is what she wants. This is what you give her. Denise finally addressed the court publicly. She described her time in prison as a, quote, nightmare, and admitted to a great, quote, moral failure when it came to her fear and the choices she had made, but continued to insist that she had nothing to do with Mike's murder. Quote, what I am guilty of is great moral failure in a time in my life when I chose to make decisions that affected my friends and family. I do want you to know that I have never and would never want anyone to be murdered, and if I could trade my life for his, I would. And Slee supported her, telling the judge that Brian acted alone and that her mother would never have conspired to kill her father, and pleaded for leniency. See, I told you, I knew she wasn't going to be able to wrap her head around that, which I can't blame her. I don't blame her. I don't, you know what I'm saying? Quote, "There's no way my mother would conspire to kill my father with Brian. She could not bring herself to do that. He acted independently of her. I never once saw him consult with her about anything." Which, I mean, as children, you're not privy to everything. You know what I'm saying? Parents have arguments behind closed doors. Do we know they're arguing? Yes. Do we know what they're arguing about all the time? No. So there are some things that you just don't know about your parents. Cheryl again begged the judge for no mercy, saying, quote, "For the rest of my life, when I try to go to sleep, I see my son clinging to a stump in the freezing water. Please don't show her any mercy." She didn't show my son any mercy. I see Michael clinging to that stump in the lake, and I hear him calling, "Help, help." The judge didn't agree with Denise's story. And in September 2021, Judge Kevin Carroll ultimately resentenced Denise to 30 years in prison, with credit for time served, refusing to view her as a minor participant. After the resentencing, Cheryl said, quote, "Michael has justice," and she admitted that she was afraid that Denise might get out and be free. Kathy has said that she still believes there's some missing pieces. She has questions why investigators kept getting halted over the years and why it took 17 years and a kidnapping for the truth to finally come out. She said she believes Brian and Denise were, quote, "protected in some way," and that when she and Cheryl tried to raise alarms, they hit police roadblocks. Assistant State Attorney Jack Campbell later explained why they did it without the deal. Brian is currently serving 20 years for the kidnapping, while Denise remains at the Florida Women's Reception Center, serving her 30-year term for conspiracy. To this day, due to the immunity deal, no one has officially been convicted of the actual murder of Mike Williams. Wow. This case shouldn't have taken 17 years to reach the truth. Mike Williams didn't vanish into the water, and he wasn't claimed by nature. What kept this case buried was silence. Silence between people who chose loyalty over accountability, and a system that was far too willing to accept the easiest explanation. There's one reason this story matters. It's because Cheryl Williams refused to stop asking questions. She refused to let her son be written off as an accident. And without that persistence, Mike would actually still be missing, and his death would still be unexplained, and people would still be running around saying it was alligators. What do you think about this case? Let me know your comments below. And I want to apologize for the late dropping of this episode. Your episodes usually go out at 6 o'clock in the morning, but I'm still trying to get on track after being sick for 2 weeks. You don't understand how much that threw me off track. You don't even understand. I'm still struggling to get back on track. But I do want to thank you for your patience, and I still wanted to get your case out, even if it was late. Next week should not be late. Hopefully, what I'm hoping for is that by this week, I'm going to be back on track. So anyway, if you want to support Love and Murder and help keep cases like this told with the care they deserve, then you can join us on the Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. Not only do you get future and backstories of bonus episodes, so you get the back catalog, you know what I'm saying? But you also get case extras like crime scene photos, trial videos, and pictures of everyone involved in the case. You also get ad-free, so no commercials within your episode, and no intro. You get a short intro like saying, "Hey, I'm Kai," and that's about it. But the long intro that the public cases get, you don't get that into Patreon. Plus, on top of all of that, you allow Love and Murder to remain listener-funded, which allows me to continue telling the cases as they should be told. So, sponsors can't come in and say, well, if we're your sponsor, then you can't say some CPS departments aren't doing their job because we won't support that. Well, that's not how I tell my case, because if this CPS department isn't doing their job, I'm going to call it out. So by you being part of the Lamb Fam, you help me tell the case as it should be told, not censored as some sponsors would demand me to censor. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. And now let's end this episode as we end each episode, and that's by reminding you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all. And as always, thank you for listening all the way to the end. Thank you for being here with me, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye. Welcome to the after show. I just recently started this because there are so many cases that I want to talk about. And these cases, I just read from an article and share the link with you. Or if I've previously written it and posted it on another platform, I just read my article. So don't forget also, I'm not promising you an after show in every single episode, but it's going to be in some. So let's get right into this case that left my jaw unhinged. On February 8th, 2025, at 2:42 p.m., a 911 call came in from New Carlisle Emergency Medical Center. The caller was a foster mother reporting that her 4-year-old foster son was barely responsive. She told the dispatcher that he had been dealing with, quote, a little bit of a stomach issue the day before and now looked really pale. As the call continued, her panic escalated. She said he had urinated on himself and that a clear liquid was coming out of his nose. Quote, snot is just pouring out, or is it throw up? I don't know. It's clear liquid. It's coming out of his nose. Oh my God, it's pouring out of his nose, she said. This case is one of a foster care little boy who was very sick with worsening symptoms. His foster mom wanted to get him help desperately. But instead, according to her, CPS said that if she took him for treatment, she would lose her parental rights. What the? If you want to hear the rest of this case and other bonuses coming out this week, join us in the Lamb Fam, patreon.com/loveandmurder. For the after show, you get that at only the $3 a month and above tiers. However, if you want bonus episodes, that starts at $5 a month and above bonus tiers. With this $5 a month tier, you get everything that's in the lower tiers and one bonus episode a month. And then at $10 a month, you get a guaranteed 2 bonus episodes a month. But I usually actually do more as I'm always putting out random Kai rants to the $10 a month tier. So the $10 a month bonus tier is actually, if you think about it, the best bang for your buck. Patreon.com/loveandmurder. The rest of this after show is continuing on in the Patreon. And so if you want to join us for that, then head on over to patreon.com/loveandmurder and just join under any one of the bonus tiers. In the meantime, thank you for joining us in this preview of the after show, and I'll see you later. Bye.